Well, my name is Laurie Russell, and my family, we have been members here for almost 5 years now. And my husband, Mark Russell, you probably would recognize him. Every now and then he'll preach when Mark Traylor is out of town and so forth. Well, when a friend heard that I was speaking today, he sent me a text and goes, I cannot wait to hear some embarrassing stories about Mark Russell. Because every time he preaches, he's always telling embarrassing and very exaggerated stories about me. And so I was like, and when he said that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I do not have a single embarrassing story about Mark. I'm like, and so I started thinking, I'm like, what can I say? So I thought about the time when we were living in Chile, and there was a small earthquake. I mean, it was a small earthquake. And then it's in the middle of the night, and it wakes us up, and he's like, what do we do? Oh, what do we do? And he's like running around the room, like, that doesn't really fit into the sermon. So then I thought about, well, what about the time when I was in labor for 36 hours? And then he was so nervous and everything that he started getting some stomach issues himself. And so then he was so dramatic about it that whenever the doctor came in to check on me, he first went to Mark to make sure Mark was okay. But then I'm like, no, that doesn't fit into my sermon either. And so then I thought about, what about the time we recently went to Walla Walla to go do a triathlon together. And while we were there, across the finish line, excited and ready to celebrate, and then Mark gets another stomach issue. And then he's on the ground having me hold his feet up in the air while a doctor feeds him like a sports gel by mouth. I'm like, oh, okay, well that doesn't fit into my sermon either. So unfortunately, I have no embarrassing stories to talk about my husband. But anyway, this past year I spent writing a book called I Love You, I Love Him, I Love Him Not, I Finally Love Him. And based on the title, you think it would be about my husband, but it's not. It's about God. And then when I asked Mark Traylor if he'd be willing to endorse it, he's like, oh yeah, that's great. He goes, but would you be willing to speak about it? And so I'm here today, and I'm going to share just a portion of the book with you. Just to give you a little background, I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, which is in the heart of the Bible Belt. And I was raised in a family where we were in church every Sunday morning, and every Sunday evening, and every Wednesday. And my faith had a lot to do with my culture. It wasn't so much my own, and my religion was something I basically inherited from my parents. And I always have had a belief in God, but there was other things that I grew up that I was told that were true turned out not to be true. And so always in the back of my mind, I wondered, what is this about God? Am I really giving up all this stuff to serve a God, and is he really true? But still, I had enough of that background to never really lose that belief. But as I went away to college and was removed from that culture, I started to test the world, and I became a really big partier and really enjoyed school in a way that God didn't really create it to be. And then I had one time some friends and we went dancing. And as we were coming home, it was a horrible night. It was a very horrible night. And as we're driving home, we're just kind of looking, and we're out the car, and my friend goes, there has to be more to life. And when she said those words, they really resonated in my heart because her words described exactly what was inside of me. And so the next day, she got up, and she went to a big church in Atlanta, and she called me afterwards. She's like, you're not going to believe it. I just went to this most incredible church. She goes, they have the hottest guys. They're so good looking. I'm like, oh, I'm there, So I say, well, when is it? When can I go? So we went the next week, and they had an incredible Sunday school department, and the pastor was going through Psalms, and everything he talked about was really convicting a lot of my lifestyle. And then even though he didn't sugarcoat it, and as each time he talked, I was like, oh, that's me. But I wanted more, because I was like a child that was starving. I needed real nutrition, and he was feeding me spiritual truth. Well then, little by little, as we attended the service, the pastor started telling more about the Bible and truths about God that were finally making sense to me for the first time. And then he finally did a sermon on faith. And I can't repeat what he said, because it wasn't like a phrase or something he said that I could regurgitate, but something in my heart changed. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to have that faith in Jesus and what he did for me and what that sacrifice he did on the cross, what it really meant. And that the burden I've been carrying was like sin, and that he had removed all that. And it was huge. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. And then my life changed overnight. And like my lifestyle changed because all of a sudden I had a reason to live, and I had a God that I finally understood. But then I got busy because I was the bad girl, and all of a sudden I was living a good lifestyle, and it felt good to finally be good. But then as the more and more I started serving, and I got so busy, all my time was going towards the serving part that I was neglecting the one-on-one with God. And then that part of my life started to suffer. But still, it felt good when you serve. You get the supernatural high that I think God gives us when we're doing what He wants us to do. But sometimes when we get, almost addicted to that we start doing everything, even whether or not He called us to it or not. And if we're not careful, we start to get burnt out. Well, so then I felt called to go to Russia on missions, and I was there for 2 years. And while I was there, it was an incredible time. God taught me so much, and I think He sent me to Russia for me, not for the Russians, because I think I did a lot of damage probably. Didn't know what I was doing over there. But God's good. And I met Mark Russell, my husband. And at the time, we just stayed friends for 4 years, and mainly because he was immature and he needed to grow up a lot before I'd be willing to date him. But so we married, and then we still had a heart for missions. And I grew up in Atlanta. It was a very cross-cultural environment that I grew up in, and I just had this burden for the world. And so then we went to Chile for 2 years, and our son Noah was born there. And then we went to Germany for 3 years, and my daughter was born there. But then while I was in Chile, I was preparing for a Bible study, and some of the women there, we were starting to feel that burnt out feeling, and kind of we're tired, and we're investing in others. And before we knew it, we're like drained. And so we're like, we got to start feeding ourselves spiritually. And so somebody sent us a Bible study. We start going through it, and we would do the homework during the week and meet once a week. Well, one day when I was I was actually cramming my homework before the study later that afternoon, and I was going through it, and the author kept going on about how much she loved God and loved reading His Word. And as I read it, I'm like, oh gosh, she is getting on my nerves. And then she kept going, I just love the Lord. I just love reading His Word. And she just kept going on and on and on. And I'm like, shut up. And then I'm like, why is this bothering me? Because everything she's saying is beautiful. Everything she's saying was something I was craving. And then all of a sudden I realized, like, how come I don't talk about God like that anymore? And when was the last time I told someone I love God and I really felt it? And do I actually know what it means to love God? And how do you know if you can love God? Because you can't see Him. You can't see His eyes. You can't touch Him. You can't ask Him one-on-one questions and get immediate answers sometimes. And all of a sudden it hit me. I'm like, I don't think I love God. Oh my gosh, I don't love God. And as I said that, this flurry of emotions started coming through because I'm like, oh my gosh, what does this mean? Am I losing my faith? Did I ever have faith? Am I about to walk away from it? I'm a missionary. Well, I get fired. And you're supposed to love God when you're a missionary. And, and I'm like, what does this mean? Well, my son Noah was 3 months old, and he was sitting next to me, and he starts crying, and I get distracted. So then I go about my day. And then later that afternoon when I'm at the study, we get to this part of the study. And then as we're there, my heart starts to beat really fast. And I get nervous, and I'm winded, even though I'm like sitting there on the floor. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I'm supposed to share. And as I look around the room, I look at the faces of the room with me, and these are all my girlfriends. And they're my sisters in Christ. And I'm like, I trust these women. I love these women. They're safe. And so I'm like, I could tell them this. And so I just start talking, and I'm not sure what I'm saying. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I just don't think I love God anymore. And it's like, like a record scratch. And they're like, one of them's looking around the room, trying not to make eye contact with me. And another one's looking at me like I just announced I was the head of a drug cartel or something. And it's like, and then it was just this awkward silence. And then, and part of me was going to say, just kidding, or take it back, But I couldn't say anything because it was out and it was true. Well, finally, one of the older women in the group goes, of course you love God. You just had a baby, you're in a foreign country, you have a lot of external stresses that are making this hard. She's like, this will get better in time, just be patient. And everything she said was true. It made sense. But it was like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that was like infected and festering deep inside of me. And something told me, no, that's not it. So I just kind of smiled and let it go, and then no one ever brought it up again. So I went home that night, and Mark and I are having dinner, and I'm clearing away the dishes, and he goes to work, do some more work on the computer. And part of me is like, share this with him. This is your husband. And then part of me is like, no, I just want to let it go. And I was hoping that what my friend had shared earlier was true. Well, out of the blue, he goes, how was your Bible study today? I'm like, oh, crud. And I'm like, and I looked in the room, and he was on the computer already. I'm like, he is just going to halfway be listening to me so I could just throw him some bait. I'm like, well, I think I made a fool of myself today. And he's like, oh, yeah, how's that? And I said, well, I told them all that I don't love God anymore. And then it was that dead silence again, and he walks in the room, he's like, well, why would you say that? And I'm like, and everything I had been feeling, all those emotions I've been bottling just came flooding out. And I start crying, I'm like, because I don't want to read the Bible, I don't want to pray, I no longer care about the lost, and I'm tired of having to talk about him everywhere I go. I don't love him, I don't love God, I don't love God. And then then to start bawling. And so he comes and he hugs me. And then, and as I'm crying in his shoulder, he's like, let's pray about it. And like all of a sudden I'm angry. I'm like, I just told you I don't want to pray. And he's like, okay, I'll pray. And at the end, if you want to pray, you can. So he prays. And when he's done, he nudges me and he says, just be honest and tell God how you feel. So I start praying. I'm like, God, I don't love you. And I want to love you, but I don't know how. When I read your word, I get bored. When I pray, my mind wanders. And I'm tired of having to tell everyone about you. And I said, it used to be an honor to serve you, and now it feels like an obligation. And I don't know what to do. Please help me love you. And then, when you're honest and you tell the truth about something, a burden you've been carrying, you feel that release. And I felt that release, but I was not fixed. I didn't all of a sudden have this love for God. But then, I was at the beginning of a journey, and I'm like, I'm committed. I want to know if this God is worthy of my love, or else I'm tired of this whole mission thing, and I'm going home to be with my family. So each morning I get up and I start praying like, God, I want to love you. Help me know how to love you. And each day, sometimes it was an emotional, great time with him. Sometimes it was just like saying the words. But each day I started feeling a little more connected with him. And little by little, he starts revealing these hindrances that are in my life. And some of them are common to most people. Some of them are just personal to me. And some of them were like personal sins in my own life, maybe the way I used, the way I spoke and talked, or maybe like gossip or thought life and stuff like that. And he starts revealing these things to me one by one, and we start tackling them together. So what I want to share with you today is one of the ones that's common to a lot of people, and it has to do with natural disasters. And natural disasters, well, let me back up a little bit. First of all, as we started going through all that, I started asking about the natural disasters, and that's a hard question. I'm like, God, how can I love you if you allow this stuff to happen? Then all of a sudden I started wondering, like, is it okay to ask God these questions? Am I being rude? Is it disrespectful? Is it, irreverent? Not kind? Or is it, I'm going to pay for this later? Especially when I die. And so then, so I started going through the Bible and looking at all the times when people started questioning God. And a lot of the way Jesus responded was based upon the motives of the person's heart. And then one of them that really stuck out with me was in Luke 7:20, and it was John the Baptist. Now, John is blood. He was Jesus' cousin. I mean, you think if there's anyone Jesus was going to be protecting, it's his own family. I mean, that's how I was raised. You look after your family. And so then, but here John is in jail on a bogus charge. He's an innocent man. But Jesus is off healing and rescuing all these other people, but he seems to be ignoring John. And then John, I don't know what's going through his mind, but I could only imagine, like, he's like, hello, here I am. Why aren't you coming to me? And then, so then John sends his disciples. We're not given exactly the reason why, but he goes, go ask him, are you the Messiah, or should we look for another? And that's a very bold question that John asked. And not only is it bold, but he involved other people. I mean, he sent his disciples, so their faith and their salvation and everything's at risk too. So they go to Jesus, and Jesus is in a crowd, He's healing, he's speaking, he's teaching. And then they ask him, are you the one we're waiting for? John wants to know. And so then Jesus turns to the crowd and he starts healing. And he starts casting out demons. And he's like, the lepers you're no longer lame, and the blind can see. And then he turns to the disciples and goes, go tell John what you have seen. Now, John's circumstances weren't removed. He stayed in jail. He was eventually executed. And he was an innocent man. But Jesus gave him what he needed. He needed to know that his whole life, his whole ministry was not done in vain. He needed to know that this was the Messiah, and he was going to take care of the rest. That all John needed to do is just hold on a little bit longer, and he was about to be in glory. And then you think, okay, that's awesome, that's a neat story. But then Jesus turns to the crowd and he goes, no greater man is there born of woman than John the Baptist. He wasn't threatened. He didn't go, oh, he of little faith. He praised John. And he knew that John had fear. Jesus knew what it was to fear. Jesus himself in the garden asked God to remove this burden, this cup from me. He knows these emotions. And so he knows when we have these, if we're truly seeking truth, that he will give us what we need to endure it if he doesn't remove it. So then natural disasters. This was huge for me. Now we have the fires going on right now. You hear of earthquakes. You hear of all types of stuff. And I'm like, God, how can I love you with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength if you allow these disasters to happen? Why? Why is there famine? Why is there droughts? Why? Why do you not see us? Are you the absent father who just comes and gives us gifts every now and then and takes off? Well, we had been in Thailand 3 weeks prior to the tsunami in 2006 and 2004. It was Christmas, it was the day after Christmas. 100-foot waves came and rushed the shore and killing 230,000 to 280,000 people in one day. It was a horrific disaster. Our hotel was on, the restaurant was on the beach. When it hit, I would have been at breakfast with my kids. What do you do? And why did so many families have to die in such a horrific death? And we were living in Germany at the time, and thousands of Germans were there. And so for weeks afterwards, the news was just covered with stories of these families coming home with only part of their family. Stories of parents running away from the wave as their kids yanked out of their arms. And there's one story where it was an Australian family, and a mom is hanging onto a tree. She has her 4-year-old, and she has her 6-year-old. And then the water is going against her back, and the debris is bumping into her. And she realizes she can't hold on much longer, and she's going to have to let go of one of them in order for any of them to survive. So in a hasty decision, she lets go of the oldest, thinking he has the best chance to survive on his own. He knew how to swim. But the minute she lets go and the waves is carrying him away, she screams, saying, no! And realizing she had made the wrong decision. It's better for all of them to die than to make that choice and live with that choice. Well, she's reunited with her husband afterwards, and they go, her and her young son survive. They go looking through all the hospitals, looking for their other son. And they find him. He's okay. And you think they'd be like, celebrate, and like, oh, yes, but they weren't. How do you survive and go on with your life after making that decision? And so they're leaving the airport, and of course, the media is all over them, and this woman is dead. She has no life in her eyes. And I'm watching that, I'm like, God, I don't think I could love you. How can you do that to her? How could you make that little boy cry every night the rest of his life knowing that his mom let go of him? It was the closest I came to walking away. So then a friend told me, she goes, read Philip Yancey's book, Disappointment God. And in it, he shared 3 verses, because I always had a problem with God of the Old Testament. He seemed a bit like a bully to me. He was always like killing women and children and wiping out this and that. And I'm like, God, do you have any emotion? Do you, how do you connect? And so Philip Yancey's great. I read all of his books if you can, because he has a good way of taking intellectual stuff and making the average person able to understand it. And one of them was like, sometimes bad things happen because there's evil in the world. And then, he talked about God being distressed. I'm like, okay. And sometimes bad things happen because of our own sin, and we bring it on ourselves. And he gave the example of Ahab, one of the most wicked kings of Israel. And then when Ahab was being, done, God gave him so many extra chances too. And when it was time for Ahab to be done with, God says, I take no joy in the death of the wicked. And then I thought about, okay, well, all these in Thailand, some knew you, some didn't. I know there's a lot of Buddhists over there. How did you feel? Those people are precious. The Thai are the most beautiful, sweet, kind people. I'm like, how can you take joy in wiping them off? And so then I came to a verse that Philip pointed out about Moab. Now, Moab was a perennial enemy of God. They were distant relatives, but they served another god, and they did infant sacrifices, and they were continually trying to have Israel lure them into sinning and worshiping false idols and stuff. Do you think if God was eager to get rid of anyone, these weren't people who just didn't believe in him. These were people who were proactively trying to lure his children away. You think he'd be ready, excited to get rid of them. But when, Moab, their time did come for their destruction. In the verse it says, therefore I wail over Moab, for all of Moab I cry out. And that showed me that it doesn't matter. God loves everyone. And he mourns when evil happens here on earth. And there will be evil continue until on this side of heaven, because when sin entered, the earth is moaning and groaning, and it will continue to moan and groan until Jesus returns. Well, years later, we found ourselves back in Thailand. And my daughter, Anya, Anastasia, we were so excited. We were there for 6 weeks as Mark was working on his dissertation. First 2-3 weeks, it was awesome. We knew food, new people, new culture. We were living in a little Thai neighborhood, and it was just all new stuff. But after 2 or 3 weeks, my daughter started getting homesick, and I was getting a little homesick too. And then in the middle of the night, she climbs up into my bed, and she's like, Mommy, I miss my family and friends. And I'm like, I know, honey, I do too. And so then she lies there, and she's crying, and I wrap my arms around her, and I start crying too. Just because to see her hurting like that and hear her little voice, and it brought back to all the emotions I was feeling too. Well, after a little bit, she, kisses me goodnight, and she goes back to her bed. Well, the next morning, she's fine. She is back to her old giddy, hyper self, and she was eager to go play with the little girl down the street. Now, her circumstances didn't change. She was still homesick. We're still in this foreign country, and we still had 3 weeks to go. But she was able to endure it, and she was happy. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that she had a mom who was willing to lay in bed and cry with her and who felt her emotions with her. And that's what these verses did for me. The disasters will continue, the fires will still come, the cancer diagnosis will still come, the divorce will still happen, the job will still be gone. But we have a Father who wraps his arms around us, and he'll cry with us, and he mourns when we mourn, and he rejoices when we rejoice. And so that gave me hope. That gave me what I needed. I may not know the why, but I knew I had a Father who was there with me, and that's what I needed. So why am I sharing this? It's because I believe after we make that decision to follow God, the most important thing that we can do is to pursue loving him. That's the most important thing we can do. When Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? Meaning, what should we be doing? What's the first thing we should be doing? He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. And I don't think it's possible for us to fully love ourselves or our neighbors until we truly love God. And love is an individual thing. What was preventing me from experiencing that may be different from what you're feeling. But if we are proactive and we're actively pursuing that relationship with God, we develop this intimacy with him, where we can hear his voice and we can see him actively in our daily lives, not just some big episodes here and there. We'll see him daily on the little things. The sun shining at that right moment, the flower right there that made us happy. Little things that will make us see that he is with us daily. And this gives us the excitement and the joy and the strength and the courage to endure the hardships and to celebrate life's victories.